This is Eric Beyer of Old Vine, Texas, a new winery tasting room featuring 100% Texas wines from wineries all over the state. We are located in Mansfield, Texas, inside of Ancora Event Center on Broad Street. We have weekly tastings, charcuterie board to enjoy, live music, and a new wine club. Go visit our website at oldvinetexas.com to sign up for our newsletter and learn more. Or you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Old Vine, Texas. We'll see you soon.
Welcome back, everybody, to We Know Texas Vino. This is your host, Will. I'm actually in a very secret bunker. As you can see, there's a lot of barrels down here, so I can't tell you exactly where it is. We're in Valley Mills Vineyard.
Valley Mills Vineyards in Valley Mills, Texas.
So that's where the secret bunker is. So if the apocalypse happens, everybody's coming here.
Yeah, there's no cell phone service down here. We've got about a foot of poured-in-place concrete beside us, above us, these big steel I-beams. And a few years ago, it was spring of 2022, we had tornado watches and then a tornado warning, like actually a tornado spotted here in Bosque County.
Holy cow.
And I was down in this cellar because it is the last thing to get blown away.
Right.
We're 30 feet underground on this side and had to excavate all this limestone out, pour this thing in place. So, yeah.
So if the apocalypse happens, this is where we're all coming to.
Well, I don't know if you're familiar, but the city of Waco, about 30 minutes away from here, was completely destroyed, the downtown, in the early 1950s by one of I think it is the most deadly tornado in American history.
Wow.
Destroyed downtown Waco. And in the late 1800s, there was also a tornado that destroyed Valley Mills, Texas, which is a mile from here.
Right.
So both of the towns near us have historically, in the last couple hundred years, been wiped out by tornadoes.
Okay.
Thus the bunker.
Man, dang, I had to tell all the secrets, didn't I?
I also used to tell people, when we first built this place, I was like, we have one of the largest underground barrel cellars in Texas. And then a couple years after that, I went and saw the one that like Slate Theory built. And I was like, all right, it's maybe in the top 5 now. I don't know.
Have you seen Kiefer Saul's?
No.
Oh.
Giant?
Oh, man. I'll have to show you a picture of it. I look like this tall, sitting at the very top. So Neil from Texas Wine Lover took a picture of me down there, and I was like this tall, and he was standing way at the top.
Wow.
In fact, actually probably where the stairwells go up to your tasting room, from way up there going down.
All right, top 5 or 10. We've got a barrel cellar.
It's pretty gigantic,
It's
guys.
something.
Y'all have to come out here and check it out.
We're doing the best we can.
Yeah. Actually, when I walked in here, that's exactly what I thought of as Kiefer Saul. It's the first thing I thought of. So, Joey, I didn't even get your last name. How do you enunciate your last word?
It's Bagnasco.
Bagnasco.
Yeah,
okay, I was nowhere near that.
There's a G and an N that make like the nya, like lasagna. So it's like Bagnasco.
Bagnasco. Okay, awesome. Well, Joey, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Real quick before we dig into this episode, first off, did you want to pour some wine right quick? Because we got to toast the show before we actually get started. So
let's taste.
Which one did you want to start with first?
So I grabbed 3 bottles, and I think these are 3 wines that represent us and kind of where our winery's at right now. First, I'm going to pour you the only sweet wine that we make, Muscat Canelli, or Moscato. And you're welcome to. I'm going to mostly taste and pour, but I've got a lot of things to get done today still.
Oh, yeah, you can't be drunk and drive. Be drinking drunk and work.
But cheers.
Cheers, toast.
Ooh. So this is actually a blend of Muscat Blanc or Muscat Canelli, synonymous, from our state vineyard right outside, as well as some fruit from farmhouse vineyards in West Texas.
Okay.
And so we grow Muscat here locally in Bosque County. We supplement from West Texas, and we always do an arrested fermentation. So the 3 to 4% residual sugar in this is, from the grape juice originally, nothing ever added. We actually, in a steel tank, use our chilling system to crash that temperature down and then have to filter out all the yeast to stop that fermentation. And it's really a pain in the neck, especially the filtration part of that. When you still have carbon dioxide in a wine, trying to force it through filters is is not that fun. Sometimes it's like a 24-hour filtration, which is horrible. But I strongly prefer that style of winemaking, and it also gives you a sweet white wine with a lower ABV.
Right.
So this is only about 12% alcohol, and 3+% residual sugar.
I do like that nose on it. I mean, for me, what I'm smelling, I get a little honeysuckle.
Yeah.
I love that honeysuckle smell. In fact, I actually grew up eating honeysuckles. But man, that is really good. And you know, I say I'm a sweet guy, but not a sweet guy. But I mean, this is porch pounder. This will get you in trouble.
Yeah, you know, every wine we make is dry, like bone dry, except for this one. And we do everything with Muscat Canelli, Moscato to like maximize aroma. Right. So from the fermentation temperature to the yeast, the timing, bottling fast, like everything we do is just like maximize esters, maximize that big Asian pear honeysuckle aroma. And yeah, it's some people, I think, like wine snobs and wine industry folks and wine makers like myself can get a little bit like haughty about sweet wines. But there's certain like, you know, Muscat Blancs or Rieslings that the aroma is so suggestive of sweetness. Like Karen McNeil in the Wine Bible talks about integration between the aroma and the palate,
right,
being one of like her 5 key things that she looks for in quality. And there's something like disjointed about if we made this wine bone dry, it almost like smells like sugar. It smells like honey. It smells so sweet. And then with a perfectly dry palate, there's that lack of integration. And you're set up, you're primed to be like, oh, it's a sweet wine. And then it isn't. So
right. It's almost a letdown.
I think so. And so while I almost always drink dry wines, I have like an exception for a couple like this.
Right.
And I wanted you to taste you're going to taste both of the grapes that we grow right here at the estate.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. Well, I know personally, anything that I'm not a big sweet person. So like I'm talking about fruit wines. I mean, I just can't do it. You know, it's almost like for me, it's like drinking snow cone syrup now. You know, now if you asked me 6 years ago, I would be drinking it like it was going out of style. Now I don't do it as much.
Yeah.
But wines like this that is very light on the sugar, because this wasn't very sweet. I mean, it was just sweet enough to say, hey, I'm a sweet wine, but I'm also can be that dry taste if you needed it in the end. So I like to tell people I'm a sweet guy, but not a sweet guy.
Yeah.
But it's one of those that you love to hate it and you hate to love it. Does that make sense?
We try to, there's a lot of like bright acid in this too.
Oh,
and
yes.
so we try to balance that sugar and acidity, and you'll get some Moscato that's like 5-6% residual, and this is half as sweet as some of them. So yeah, we don't go for that extreme, like, you know, syrupy kind of white wine. And it's also like the Texas consumer, like the guests that come to our tasting room will have a range of preferences. Right. And like most of our wine club members gravitate towards our more, quote, serious, you know, intense tannic dry reds that we'll taste. But there's probably 20% of our people that will gravitate towards this or a light, crisp, dry rosé. But it's nice to have a bit of a range so that folks can find something that suits their palate. And on the kind of sales side and on the wine education side, I try to remind our staff not to be too judgmental about like where someone's starting out. And if there's a, you know, stereotypically, it's like a, you know, if there's a group of like, you know, girls that are in their 20s, we're like, this is probably maybe they'll surprise us and love something really big and tannic, but we try not to have like judgment about like, you should like this. Right. And I've kind of described to our staff before, like, it's almost like we're like a fine chocolatier or something. And we might be really into dark chocolate and into bitter flavors and feel like the finest expression of chocolate is this really intense 80% cacao thing. But you have to make the milk chocolate too for that, or I feel that we do, for that customer who comes in who hasn't gotten there yet. and maybe they will, maybe they won't, but it's nice to have an introductory thing to grab their attention and something that's affordable. Like I think this is $28 a bottle. Yeah, we want to have a few like entry level wines that people can come in and enjoy themselves and not feel like they have missed the whole experience, or it's over their head, or they haven't developed the palate for it, so they can't partake.
Well, you know, in my experience with that, working in a tasting room myself, in my experience is the people who like sweet wines is because of one or two reasons. One, their first experience was nothing but a sweet wine, or two, their experience was someone gave them a big, bold, dry wine, and they drank it, and they're like, "Oh, I don't like this," and so they went from zero to like, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy."
Yeah,
you know. And so, in my experience, when I find this out by talking to them, I like to say, "Hey, let's do a tasting. Let me walk you through some whites, some rosés, and get you some reds, and teach you about how to taste this stuff." And when they do that, they start understanding, and then that's where you start getting them introduced into reds. You know, say, "Hey, this is what's going on." And then when you talk about a tannin, the best way I describe it to them as a tannin, get you a wet tea bag, stick it on your mouth.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they look at me like, "Why would I do that?" I was like, "Well, I mean, if you wanted to experience and you want to get your palate trained, just do that randomly. Just stick it on your palate.
Or just massively overbrew it." Yeah.
Yeah.
That's perfect. And I think the other thing that people, when they go, "I don't think I like tannic wines," if they know the term tannic, or if they're objecting to kind of bolder reds, sometimes it's like, you're just taking too big of sips.
Yes.
Like you to really appreciate wine, especially a very tannic wine, like often obviously food helps, but like if you're having it by itself, like, you know, you'll take a very small sip. And so like it is kind of a sign that someone's newer to the wine industry, even as a guest. If you're gulping down your wine, it's not made for that.
It's got a tequila shot.
And you don't, like, your mouth doesn't even produce enough saliva to like basically to calm down the amount of tannin with a huge like gulp of wine. And so some of it's just learning how to appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, you know, one thing I tell people that if you're going to go out and you really enjoy a good tannic wine, but you don't want the dryness in your mouth, because a lot of people they're used to just taking big gulps. I tell them like 2 hours before you're going to go out to drink a lot of wine, eat a lime, eat a lemon. Because it just makes the acid makes your mouth just water. So it'll kind of help compensate for that a little bit. Now I know that I also told them, I said, doing that will actually change the flavor of the wine a little bit because you got acid in your mouth, but at least it'll help your mouth to generate saliva the whole time.
Yeah, there's like that temporary, like your palate shifts depending on what you're eating that day, but then there's also like the long-term like palate where, frankly, like the American palate is used to a lot of sugar,
right?
And if you're having lots of sugary drinks and soda and your palate is very used to, you take your coffee and your tea sweet, then your palate may be in that place where you're going to prefer a sweet wine too. And I find, usually if you take your coffee black and you like your tea with no honey or sugar, then, you may be more on the side of maybe closer to like the common European palate and dry wines.
Right.
Again, like I don't want to say there's a right answer every time, but for myself, I like to be able to appreciate dry wines, and part of that is knowing, like, don't eat a bunch of candy and then taste it. Yeah.
Two of the funniest things that happens in the tasting room is I see someone walking in chewing gum and it's spearmint.
Tough. Yeah.
And then you're sitting here like, okay, this is not going to work very well. You got it?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you see them come in after they've had a big thing of chocolate, because there's Kilwin's Chocolate Factory right down the road from the tasting room. So they come down there and they eat a whole bunch of chocolate from there. So you're like, okay.
You're wearing a ton of perfume. Yeah.
Yeah. We won't talk about that one.
Yeah. I've had to tell like an employee on their first or second day, like, don't do this.
Wear something subtle.
Do less.
Yeah. Less is more. Well, man, usually the education is at the very end. That was actually really good. I mean, hey, you know what? I like to let the flow of the conversation go, and it went really well. So real quick, I'm going to hit where everybody can find us. So you can find us on WeKnowTexasVino.wine. You can also find us on Facebook at We Know Texas Vino. And, of course, you can find us on any podcasting platform, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, whatever. And then, of course, you can find us on video, and you can find this video on YouTube as well. So this is episode 97. So we're hitting that century mark. So I'm pretty excited about this. Doing it for 3 years now. In fact, if by the time this episode comes out, everybody's listened to the Sid Miller one, and I'm hoping that one right there like shoots to 1,000 downloads, and then the momentum just holds on to you, and you hit 1,000 downloads.
Well, I don't know if I have like the charisma of a politician. That's another level of like, I have the charisma of a winemaker who's used to farming and being in this cellar alone. But that's like a level of communication that we'll see if I can match.
Oh, I'll tell you what, the most exciting thing was when I did my sound check with Sid. He got up on the microphone. He goes, "Hey, this is Sid Miller, your Texas State Agriculture Commissioner." And I'm like, all right, we're ready to go.
Yeah, he's got it. He's got it ready.
Oh yeah, he timed that in real quick. So, well, Joey, let's get started on this. So, when I was doing a little bit of research on y'all, I've found something very fascinating. So, the vineyard is actually not just owned by your family, but it's actually owned by another family as well. So, it's co-owned.
Fact check you on this.
Okay.
It used to be years ago.
Okay.
So, if you found an article about like Valley Mills Vineyards from when it first started, it was my folks, the Bagnascos,
Okay.
As well as there was another family for the first 3 years called the Peppers, still good family friends. That guy's actually a doctor, so his name is Dr. Pepper, which is always funny. But that was just the first, I think about 3 years of the business, like 2007 through 2009 or 10, and around that time, that other couple wanted to get out, and my folks bought their half. And so since for most of the history of the business, 2010 through now, it's just been my folks and I running the family business here. And so it is just one family these days. Yeah.
Well, like I've looked everywhere online. Everything I saw all said the two families. So I do apologize.
All good.
So what made your folks decide they wanted to do this? What made them want to decide let's do a vineyard? I mean, everybody just didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to grow grapes and make wine.
So my folks are both ethnically Italian, and basically all of my great grandparents immigrated to the U.S. through Ellis Island, and so my father's a Long Island Italian, and there was always like wine at the dinner table and with food and in the culture. And when I think he really got the wine bug kind of in his 40s and started traveling to other wine regions and tasting more broadly. And he started visiting some Texas growers, and this was back in like 2005, 6. Going to the annual conferences and the Grape Day and all those, like taking some of those educational opportunities. He's also just an autodidact reader. Like if he wants to learn something, he'll learn something, and really imparted that on his kids, which I love and try to carry forth. And so, he started learning about growing grapes and bought this land, did an A&M soil test and planted the first acre in 2007. And that very first acre is the top acre on our hillside, and it's half Muscat Canelli, like we just tasted, and half Tempranillo, which we'll taste next. Let me know whenever you're ready.
You just pour when you're ready. I'm on your time.
I'll get to it in a second. Let me finish this one. But my father, I was in high school at the time and got roped into helping him plant that first acre of grapes. I was 17. It was like I think the spring of my senior year in high school. Yeah. And then that summer after graduating high school, my first intro to like not just wine around the dinner table, but the wine industry was helping him with this crazy project in farming this land. And my father, he's a doctor by trade and had never farmed on any scale before. He's always liked plants and done a little gardening, but this was a bigger undertaking. And there's a local farmer out here in Valley Mills that my father that had kind of a little company with a bulldozer, land clearing, et cetera. My father hired him to kind of clear that acre a bit and rip through the rows. And this local guy was very, very honest, didn't want to just get paid to do work. And I think he was thinking like, all right, there's this doctor who works in the big city.
Who's this fool gonna do this?
And he doesn't know anything about farming. And my dad likes to tell this story, but this guy calls him and says, hey, like, I don't want to take your money. Like, this hillside is so rocky, nothing's going to grow up here. Like this is futile. Like, let me just take my bulldozer and go home. And like this, and my dad was like, no, grapes, they'll do great in rocky soil. And he's like, it's nothing but rock. It's pure rock. And he was like, just rip the rows like we talked about, like trust the plan. And that top acre has been the best acre of our now 5-acre estate vineyard. And we've won big awards off it. And it is quite rocky. There's a little soil there, but it's quite a rocky site. But it's a testament to, I think, my father's persistence and what he had learned thus far, and also to the fact that grapevines are quite unique when it as compared to a lot of other crops. I mean, if this guy was clearing for a cornfield, he would have been totally correct. Right. For most, row crops, you wouldn't pick a steep hillside. But in most of, Central Texas, it's, in my opinion, the superior sites have a slope and have drainage and have either quite rocky or sandy soil. And so, some of those things my father already had figured out, and some of them I think he lucked out on. But the more I've seen, and I've worked around the state a little bit and worked with High Plains folks and worked down in Fredericksburg. And I really am very glad that he picked the site that he did. And when I ended up kind of going off to college and going off and working for other folks and fully rejoining the family business full time in 2017, I've been kind of running the family business since then. And we've made little mistakes along the way, but we've made a few really good decisions. And planting on this land, both for the wine quality and the beauty, was a good decision.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So when you were 17 and he was having you help plant vines out here, you weren't excited about that, were you?
I actually kind of did like it.
Was? Okay.
Like I weirdly liked it. There's something, I think people like, you either have this thing or you don't, where like you get this weird satisfaction about working with plants and seeing them grow. And like, I keep a vegetable garden that takes way too much of my time. Right. Like I just planted like 7 different varieties of figs. Oh, okay. For no commercial reason. Right. Like I am fascinated by plants. Okay. And so I like tactile things and things that you can see the end result, and you can, so I started off as a business major in college. Okay. And I went to like a kind of like a Wall Street feeder school that like all my business school friends were going to go work at, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, the ones who got good jobs. But that was like the goal, Big 4 accounting firms. And I was taking these business classes and everything was very abstracted from that like core reality. And it was, management classes and accounting and finance classes. And like, you could learn like how mortgages are structured and how to look at a balance sheet of company. But when I came home and helped my father farm, there was something just so much more immediate and tactile that there was no path from that to making any real money, but it was intrinsically enjoyable. I really and that's still kind of my favorite part of the whole industry, are the days that I get to just be outside with the plants. And there's parts of winemaking that I really love too. Some of the creative decision making and the progress you can make, and little tweaks having big effects, like that can be very enjoyable. But I do think that that suits my personality, farming. Yeah.
I will have to definitely agree with you on that. When you grow something and you plant it yourself and you sit there and curate it and you watch it and you take care of it and you do everything you can to it to make sure it's a healthy plant to produce its fruit, it's amazing to watch that. And then you turn around and take that fruit and create it into something else, whether it's a dish for dinner or it's into a bottle of wine. It's just something about that a lot of people in this world will never, ever understand. I know personally, I love growing things as well. Growing up as a kid, I had a garden, huge garden. as a kid, I hated doing it until we started digging into the dirt and all of that. And it was actually fun. We enjoyed doing it. And actually, my grandmother used to pickle a lot of stuff. And she used to make this really amazing bread and butter jalapenos. Just don't eat the carrots. Those carrots, I don't know what they did. They absorbed that heat from that.
Really
jalapeno.
spicy.
Oh yeah. I made a mistake on that once, but yeah, it's amazing the feeling that when you start a seed or even a pre-started plant, grapevine, let's take for example, and you go out there and you curate it, you're watching it grow, you make sure you go out there and you trim it properly or you prune it properly, and then you kind of train it and get it going, and the next thing you know, you got your harvest coming off of it and you're pulling the grapes off of that, and you're sitting there, you're looking at that grape and you're like, I grew this. And then you go in here and you crush it and you stem it and you get it into the tank, you get your fermentation going, and you get it into the bottle, and then you open that cork later 5 years down the road or whatever, and you taste it and you're like, man, I grew this from nothing. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people in this world.
You get the whole like start to finish life cycle of that product, and including enjoying it yourself, but also like seeing that served at someone's wedding and seeing someone like have their first moment where they really break through and love a wine, and it's something you planted the plant 5 years ago, and now they're drinking the wine. Like that is pretty. It's something that I wouldn't have gotten had I gone the more corporate route. Right. And I kind of, you figure yourself out more and more probably through life, hopefully. But even in my late teens, early 20s, I knew myself well enough to know that if I got a job that I didn't connect with in terms of like meaning, and I didn't get a deep feeling of like, here's what I'm doing and here's why I'm doing it and here's why it matters and here's who's helped and here's like, even in a subtle way of like, we made someone's day better. Someone planned a day trip out to our place and they had a great time. And like, it doesn't have to be like saving the world, but I kind of knew if I didn't have some tangible, like I start here, here's the middle, here's the end. And I can go home and be like, we bottled some good wine today. People had a great time today. You know what I mean? The vine, we harvested at the right time, whatever, like, wrap that in, have a full circle process, and like be able to connect every little step you're doing at work to this meaning. And working at a small business, especially like for my folks and I, it's our family business. That's all just it's so tangible here. It's so tactile. It's so immediate. Right. And it kind of, it's a good way to like inoculate yourself against having those like crises of meaning, or like I can't see myself having like the stereotypical like midlife crisis in this kind of a job, because it's just so fulfilling. Right.
I'm going to drop you some words for you here. El vino e vivo. You know what it stands for?
In wine, there's life. What is that?
So yes, in wine, there's life. So my label that I'm working with for my stuff is going to be called that. Or actually, when you put it into Google Translator, you put it in the wine is alive. That's what it translates into.
The wine is alive. Got it.
So that is my goal, because there's life in everything that we do. And in this world that we're in right now, there's a lot of life in wine, because you make good friends, you make good families, you make good choices. Well, I don't know if the choices part.
I like that, because it's also it's a bit of a double entendre. It's scientifically accurate, because every wine has living microbes in it as well. Yeah.
So, I'm not going to go too far into my stuff, but my bottles, every one of them will actually tell a story, why it was named the way it was and where it came from. And it'll always tell a story about why the wine is alive. So I've already got all those ideas in it. Unfortunately, I've been jack of all trades, master of none. So again, that's
I love that. We were talking just before about your label that you're starting yourself, and I love that.
Yeah, somebody's going to have to interview for my own stuff. I don't know who that's going to be, but somebody's got to interview for my stuff. So
you could be on both sides of the table, just interviewing yourself at some point.
So I guess I could. So, you actually answered like 90% of the questions I had already set up, because it's kind of funny that you did all that. So I'm glad you did that. So where's my questions here? So what made you decide, you grew grapes, you grew the vines. You just decided one day, hey, I'm going to just become a winemaker now. I'm going to give up what I'm doing here in college, and I'm just going to do winemaking now. Or was there something that actually triggered that?
I switched career plans 3 or 4 times.
Okay.
This is like plan D. It's a great plan. It's going great. But originally I mentioned I thought about, I was a business major. I thought I wanted to go in the corporate world. Then I switched and became an English lit major and graduated as an English literature major. Loved that. Loved the courses. Loved Irish poetry and all these classes that were fascinating and again have almost no commercial value whatsoever. At least I haven't been able to apply them in that way. By the way, I'm pouring our 2019 Tempranillo. This vintage has been sold out for several years. Can you see there? I pulled this out of the little library we have down here in the cellar.
And I saw that way over there.
Yeah.
No, we can see it. Hang on.
Just
I can turn the camera
keep
over.
a few old bottles around
I
here.
can turn the camera over there. So there it is.
There's a little shelf with some old bottles and a few cases beside that you can't see. So I pulled out a bottle of our 2019 vintage because I wanted you to try. This is our most award-winning wine ever, and took best of class at Texom and a double gold medal at the San Francisco Chronicle International Competition. So winning top awards at 2 of the biggest competitions in the U.S. for the same wine told us that we were on the right track with this one. And it's also again, those 2 original blocks that my father planted. It was Muscat Canelli, and it was this block of Tempranillo.
Okay.
And yeah, all of our Tempranillo now from the estate only goes to wine club members, but this one goes to nobody because it's been sold out for a couple of years.
You know, like the very first thing, and I'm trying to get that smell again. I get a lot of tobacco, like right the very first smell. I got tobacco off of it, and now I can't get that smell.
I very much agree. Yeah, this is a Rioja clone, and we use almost 50% new American oak. So like if we have 10 barrels, 5 of them will be new American oak, 5 will be neutral. We'd call that about 50% new oak. It's almost always like medium or medium plus American barrels. And yeah, I love how the fruitiness of Tempranillo kind of fades in time. And at this point it's pretty subtle, and it's more of those like secondary aromas have risen up to become the main show. So there's that like uncut cigar, and there's almost like a black olivey thing, or like a leathery smell.
That black olivey thing you're talking about, I can smell that. Oh man. Now, and you're right. The taste on it is very subtle. It's not very like, hey, I'm here. My name is Tempranillo. Very subtle. I like that. So kind of a little bit of a little light cranberry, a little bit. And that little tartness of a cranberry.
When we first harvested this, I was concerned it would be too light.
Okay.
And it is one of our lighter, smoother vintages. Typically with Tempranillo, I'm trying to optimize for a little bit of a slightly riper fruit than this, and thus more extraction, more tannin, higher alcohol. But sometimes you surprise yourself where I'm like, this wasn't quite as,
right.
It didn't hit the numbers, quite like the bricks, and thus the alcohol weren't quite as high as I like it. But I think it ended up as, you get some of that kind of tart cranberry or like plum on the palate. And it made for like this very smooth, very drinkable red. And it was very interesting to me that our most award-winning vintage is not my personal favorite vintage because I like this a lot, but we have a few, like our 18 and our 22 vintage. We have a few that we achieve a little more ripeness and a little more tannin, and they really grab your tongue and they really make a statement. And this is one of our kind of smoother vintages.
Now, tell me if I'm crazy on this. Have you ever smelled fresh concrete after it's been laid down and how it smells, and then after it gets a little bit of water on, you spray water on it a little bit?
Oh yeah.
How you get that smell off there?
It's almost like petrichor, like the smell of the rain on rocks.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's the poetic version I would use because concrete does kind of smell like concrete now that you say it, but like,
But I mean, I'm sitting there and I keep swirling and I keep smelling something and I'm just like,
that's good. That's the first time that note has been brought up with this wine, but I like it.
well, that is absolutely good. Holy cow.
Thank you.
I had somebody the other day, they were reading some tasting notes and they explained, wanted to know, why does someone sometimes will say, oh, this tastes like wet asphalt or wet dirt or something like that, something obscure. And they're like, did someone just literally go outside and lick the asphalt or something like that? I was like, well, I'm hoping that's not what happened. But I've been trying to figure it out myself. And last year I had an epiphany moment.
Okay.
So it was really hot outside in Grapevine. And we had one of those micro rainbursts that comes in. And so when it's really hot and everything's hot, and this micro rainburst comes in and it cools off, and all of a sudden you get that steam that comes up and you smell that asphalt. And I was like, that's the taste.
Yeah.
That's what you're tasting. That's what you're smelling. And then
like most of your taste is really smell.
Yeah.
Like you really taste like a few basic flavors, saltiness, your savory thing. Like your actual taste buds on your tongue, are not the really finely tuned instrument. That's like all the olfactory stuff that's happening in the nasal passages. Right. And so, there's these like chemicals or combination of volatile chemicals that you smell from that asphalt that then a similar combination of aromatic, chemicals and compounds in the wine rises up and hits your olfactory, and it'll trigger like a sense memory of that time you smelled the wet concrete or the black olive or like there's times where people get like really poetic with their tasting notes, and there's like a really basic misconception that now and then a guest will come in, again, someone who's new to wine, and be like, so you put strawberries into the wine? I'm like, no. It might remind you of strawberries,
Yes.
But I think especially people who have never tasted wine grapes and the incredible diversity of flavors that exist within the grapes themselves, have a hard time wrapping their mind around the idea that you can have such a range of aromas coming from grapes.
Right.
And without any added flavors or spices or seasonings or fruit or anything like that. And we and most Texas wineries, we're making wines the way the Greeks and the Romans did, and there's one ingredient, grapes, and there's never any flavorings. Right. But we have to talk about wine, so it is helpful sometimes to you give these suggestions, these notes.
Yeah. Well, like you said, wine brings up memories. Well, so when I smelt that asphalt, it did take me back to a time and place in my life as a kid growing up in Breckenridge, Texas. Our baseball field is out in the country. And so that wet dirt, and I remember sitting out there as a kid, we're playing baseball in the field with all my friends and stuff. And all of a sudden, again, another micro rainburst comes and hits that dirt, and that dirt comes up, and you're smelling that dirt. And it reminds you of that smell. And that's one of the things I love about wine. And again, it goes back to what I was saying about my label. Because every time you do something with it, or smell it, or you taste it, it always will trigger a memory or a thought or another place in time, and I tell everybody when they drink wine, you're not wrong. What you taste is your palate. It's what you taste. You may taste something, and this is what you put on your tasting notes here, but when you taste something, it's going to be completely different, because it could be from anything from what you've been eating all your life to what you just got through eating 30 minutes ago or 4 hours ago. Whatever you've done is going to contribute to the way that's going to taste to you. And I tell them that there is no such thing as a wrong answer in wine. What you taste is what you taste. And a lot of people, when I tell them when they taste it, I say, the minute you taste it, after you smell it and you taste it, tell me immediately what you crave for or what you taste. And that's what that will taste for you.
Yeah, I think I agree, especially when it comes to like a guest or someone coming to wine. As a winemaker, I do try to be technical in the sense of like, I need to be able to detect like true flaws in wines.
Correct.
And I want to be more objective, or if I can, I would like to train my palate or keep my palate trained to one, like not over evaluate my own product. And you can get like house palate where you start to really, really fall in love with your little babies, your wine that you made, and they must be the best ever. And maybe they're the best, maybe they're not. Sometimes an outside competition or just the market, like people will tell you if they like it or not by what they choose, what they buy, what they say. And also as a winemaker, I feel like you always have to keep tasting things that you didn't make and tasting broadly to understand like where does what I'm doing fit into the spectrum of what's out there. And like, is this Tempranillo like representative of the style that the variety is typically made in? And even knowing how, if it's a little different, that's okay, but you need to know how to describe it as such. And if people expect like a Gran Reserva, you might say, yeah, this was also in the barrel about 2 years and has now been in the bottle, this vintage, for 3 or 4 years. And so anyways, having those reference points I think is important. And then during the winemaking process, I really try to keep that discipline in terms of like, usually if I'm tasting through barrels here in the cellar, I'm mostly tasting for faults and flaws. Right. And I'm tasting for, I'm smelling for, is there any Brett? Is there any acetobacter? Is there any ethyl acetate? Like, are there any of and there's only a handful of those like common kind of flaws or pitfalls or directions that a wine could go bad in obvious ways. But I try to be really, really strict about that and never put anything in a bottle that has any perceptible flaw. Right. My father and I are really on the same page where we're very protective of our brand. We don't want to put an inferior or mediocre wine into a bottle and put our label on it. Because I, frankly, if I visit a winery and I taste something that's flawed, I judge that brand harshly for years. And even, it might not even be fair, but, and if someone serves me like 5 wines and 4 of them are pretty good, and then 1 is like vinegar, I'm like, man, they don't know what they're doing.
Well,
the 4 must have been good luck, and the 5th,
right.
I really, really appreciate consistency, and I think for Texas as a wine region, that's one of the things that it's gotten better and better. But it's when someone does a tour of Texas wineries and visits tasting rooms and spends their time and their money with us, like we need to have a standard that it's like, it's kind of unacceptable to sell someone a flawed bottle.
Right.
And you as a winemaker have to take the ego hit if something's not good enough. And you as a business owner have to take the financial hit. And if you have something that's not up to scratch, like, you got to pull it because
that's a hard thing to do.
It's harder to sell it. It's harder to like have in my opinion, it's harder to like see the disappointed face of someone and also like, I'm not like a born salesman, right? Okay. Like I can sell this bottle because it won international awards and I actually love it and I grew it and I'm connected to it. And like, I have a lot of reason and I can confidently be like, I think this is one of the best Tempranillos in Texas. And I have some evidence to back that up. But if this smelled like vinegar, like I'm not such a good salesman that I could be like selling ice to an Eskimo being like, no, trust me, it's great. Like, and so like, even to make I'll always be, even at times like subbing in our tasting room, I'll always be connected to actually selling our product. And like, I don't want to sell wine that's no good. And that's like technically flawed because those are things that can almost always be avoided. Yep. And you can't have 100% of wines have 0 faults or 0 problems, but you can have a really good batting average and you can get to 95+% of your wines don't have any flaws. And that last few percentage points, if there's a problem, a bad barrel here or there, you can have the discipline to just be like, this barrel is getting poured down the drain and no customer will ever taste what was inside it.
I have to definitely agree with you on that. I mean, I've gone to a couple tasting rooms and I've tasted some stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is good. This is good. Oh, wait a minute. Hold still. What's going on with this one? But everybody should always get a second chance.
Sure.
I mean, because especially when they're still a very young winemaker.
Yeah.
For my example, my first wine, I don't expect it to win gold at all. I don't expect none of that. What I do expect is someone says, hey, this tastes good, but here's what you could do to improve it. And I think, I feel, and this is my perspective of the Texas wine industry, I think we have enough winemakers out there that says, hey, something's wrong with this wine. Have you tasted this lately? Or, it could have been just that bottle, maybe. I don't know. I know some bottles just go bad because somehow they got into some heat, whatever, Mm-hmm. But I definitely agree with you that when you taste something, you're like, yeah, we're probably not going to do this one again, but come back again. Let's try it again later, There's
definitely that learning curve. And like we've had, lots that didn't work. We've had grapevines that died and had to get replanted. Like, I don't want to put out the idea that like we've just gone from strength to strength always. And I keep really good. I keep this document, which ends up being a dozen or more pages every year, that I call Notes for the New Season, and it's how to make better wine next year than I did this year. And it's every little trial and experiment we ran and what were the outcomes of that. So something as simple as like barrel A, barrel B, yeast A, yeast B, little trials, sometimes more complicated than that. But, everything that went wrong in the season, from equipment breaking to like, oh, we had a stuck fermentation, like every problem in our process gets written in my notes document and gets reviewed before we make fermentation plans for the next year. And like, I definitely believe in like, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to learn from those. And I had a professor in college that always used to say like, fail better, fail again. Right. Like keep, you know what I mean? You crawl your way up, to improve bit by bit, and that kind of momentum can have a huge outsized effects. But on the commercial side, I will say, if you look at just like, there's someone who loves wine and they go to Napa and they go down to Fredericksburg or something. Like if the quality of what's in the glass is like comparable, there's a lot of people in Texas that will support their homegrown industry and prefer it and find things that they can't find in other places. But if they go to one single winery, and it's the first Texas winery they've ever been to, and they taste something that's actually really subpar or actually like technically flawed, there's people that will write off the entire state because of one thing they tasted that isn't good. And so that's maybe why I would just be like, can we all really be rigorous and raise the bar and be like, if I'm charging you American dollars for it, we put a stamp of approval on it. And it's like, this is going to be, some will be great, some will be just good, but can we not have flawed wines? Right.
That brings up a really good story. I want to tell you about that. So I had a guy come into the tasting room, and right off the bat, he looks at the tasting menu. He goes, I do not want any Tempranillo in my tasting. I'm like, oh yeah, why is that? He goes, I had some Tempranillo down in the hill country, and it was subpar. It was not great to drink off that. And I asked him what wineries, and he couldn't name them off the bat. I said, okay, that's cool. So what I like to do is I like to do a blind tasting. So we'll do a spectrum tasting from white, rosés, and then reds. And in that process, when you tell me you don't like something, guess what I'm fixing to put in your tasting? Mm-hmm. And so we're going through the tasting, and like the next to the last glass of reds, I pour him a Tempranillo, and he drinks it. And I don't tell him what it is. I let him drink it first, then I tell him what it is. And he drinks it. He goes, oh my God, this is so good. What is this? It's like, do you really want me to tell you? And he goes, yeah, what is it? I said, that's Tempranillo. And he looked at me, he goes, oh, you tricked me, didn't you?
But yeah, that guy probably had a flawed bottle or just a really unbalanced wine or something that he didn't care for. Or he had
something that he ate that day that just really screwed it all up, Yeah. There's a lot of stuff. And I explained that to him. I said, just because you try to wine at one or two wineries, don't judge that grape in Texas on that. There could be a lot of things.
I've had like a horrible flawed Chardonnay, a Cabernet, like even the best grapes and most popular grapes in the world, you can have a very bad version of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even I told him, I even asked him, I said, did you brush your teeth today? Did you use the wrong toothpaste? Did you chew bubble gum earlier today? I mean, there's a lot of things that went into that. And when I told him that, he goes, okay, I definitely understand. Do you know he came back a month later and he goes, he found more Tempernails that he really liked now because of that.
That's great.
So it's a great story. Or I had another lady, she looked at Tarragado and she goes, I hate tobacco. I hate wines that taste like tobacco. Of course, in that tasting, again, don't tell her what it is. I poured it for her. She enjoyed it. And I told her what it was. And she's like, okay, I won't judge anymore. So I hate tricking people like that.
I wish smoking was good for you because tobacco smells great.
It
cigarettes, does. And it's cool.
No. Listen, I'm sitting here thinking you're all serious.
Here's the thing, kids. No.
I'm sitting here thinking, like, wait a minute, hold on, wait a minute.
No, I wasn't being serious about like it does smell good.
Oh, it does.
Like a cigar, like even without being lit, just smelling a cigar, just when you cut it, it smells great.
Unfortunately, one of my guilty pleasures when I was a kid is we used to fly remote control airplanes as a kid with my dad. And there's this one guy that always come out, and he had this van that he specifically built out for carrying all his airplanes in. And every time he would open up that side door of that van, big old pipe tobacco smell comes out of there. And I would sit there at the edge of the truck and go, just to smell that pipe tobacco, because I just love that smell.
Yeah.
But I've never smoked a pipe ever. But, well, never mind. This is not topic.
Yeah.
But I love a good cigar.
Yeah. It's interesting because as a tasting note in wine, like to me, there's a lot of like fresh tobacco in this Tempranillo as a tasting note, as an aroma. But people have their different experiences. So yeah, if you use that tasting note and you say, oh, you might smell some tobacco, some people are thinking like this stale smell of old Uncle Rick and they hate it. Well, you're just like, all right, well, not like that. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, yes, I get that from a lot of people. And so I don't like to trick them, but I like to teach them. And I use that as a teaching moment. Don't judge, like you were talking about, don't judge just one winery off of what they've got. Try a whole bunch of different ones. And one of the things I tell a lot of people, especially people who are coming into Texas that are just now starting to find Texas wines, release your mind of what you know about wine from any other region and just enjoy what you have in front of you. Because your palate, and one person I really got to talk to, became good friends with, they're from California and they love California wines. And they came here to Texas. They said, I can't find a good Texas wine. I said, you can't find a good Texas wine is because you're trying to compare it to California. And the next word out of their mouth was yes. And I said, that's where you're flawed at. Don't try to compare our wines to California or Oregon or Washington or Old World. Texas is Texas. California is California. Judge it for what it is. And you'll find what you like. We even got an argument over food, because the food in let's say Mexican food in California is different from here in Texas. Everything, all the flavor notes is completely different. So I tell people, when you come from a different region and you move here or you're here visiting, release all your thoughts of what you thought, what tasted over here, and just let it be what it is here. And then I get a lot of feedback say, you're right, because now I found wines that I like.
Yeah, there's some great Texas wines. I think I have like brands that I trust and like wineries that usually, because there's a winemaker there who is working with solid grapes and knows their stuff. And so there's definitely brands that I trust and people that I'm like, yeah, I've never had a bad wine from, several folks. Yeah, I think I would love to see our industry keep going the direction it is, which is just like more consistency, and like just like raising the floor.
Yes.
And even like, the last year or two has been a little tough in the alcohol market and everything. And I think the best thing that could come of that is sort of like, this is like bad to say for like maybe other like business owners and everything, but like sometimes a little like creative destruction is like actually what you need. And it's like the strong will survive. The people who are actually making a great product at a reasonable price or a good value or have, wine club members they're connecting with, they're going to be fine. Right. And it'll force everyone to like raise their game and hopefully, but yeah.
Sometimes What it's the rise of the phoenix. Let's just call it that way. You know, sometimes the great stuff come from ashes.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to endure a little bit of hard time. And then when you come out to the other end, you may have something of the most amazing stuff in the world.
Yeah. There's been an interesting, I was reading like a Wine Business Monthly article several months ago about, they were kind of like arguing like, is the slight decline that people have seen in wine sales all across the US, has it been mostly an economic thing where it's people, especially younger people, like just don't have the budget for pricey wine? Or is it more of like a health thing where it's like there's a couple studies that are a little more negative on alcohol. And I think the World Health Organization put out some kind of like any amount of alcohol is bad for you kind of messaging. And like, is it more of a health decision that people are going like, you know, full sobriety, no alcohol whatsoever? I personally think it's more of an economic thing, and people, if they can afford high quality wine, would love it. But like, you know, beer is always going to be cheaper. Spirits are per, you know, if you do the math on like the amount of alcohol, it's always going to be cheaper. There's always going to be cheaper forms of alcohol, and like wine will always be somewhat of a luxury good. And no one needs it to survive, or if you find yourself needing it, that's a problem.
I like how you corrected that one.
You should check yourself if you feel that you need it.
Yeah, programs for that.
Yeah. That's time to get help. If you have it in the morning, that's also a sign that it's a problem. But yeah, anyways, I think the last couple of years, it's the slight dip in the broad trend there, I think is mostly an economic thing. You brought up a really great topic there. Let's hit that for just a moment. Well, you know, right now, let's just say the economy is in a slump right now. Yeah.
And the wine industry, specifically California right now, let's just talk about them for just a moment. And it's not a negative way, okay? They're pulling up vines right now because they've got so much grapes there and so much wine there.
Yeah.
They're saturated now. Now, let's say this is your vineyard, okay? Let's say you've got 50 acres of vines out there, okay? And you have everything from, let's say, 1-year-old vines going out there to 100-year-old vines. Which one are you going to pull up first?
Well, to be honest, I would probably, if I was just a grower, right? I'm not a winemaker. I would imagine it goes by what's the hardest to sell. Okay. So like, it depends. I would assume it's by variety and it's by region, but like I think if you're growing really, really high quality Cabernet in the Napa Valley, you're not uprooting that. But if you're growing a variety that's a little obscure in the Central Valley of California and you can't find a buyer for it 2 years in a row and your grapes are rotting on the vine, like I would imagine that's mostly what's getting pulled up. But it is such a shame to me to see like if there's 100-year-old vines getting torn up. And I think a lot of times it'll be, like old vine Zinfandel and stuff in California. And it's like, if that's not the trendy wine and those bottles aren't selling that well, people end up ripping out those vineyards. And yeah, that's like kind of heartbreaking, but it's also like it's kind of the market speaking.
Yeah. But you know, trends always change.
Yeah.
So, you know, right now everybody wants a little cab. Next week, somebody maybe wants a Merlot, you know, and next week after that, it might be something else. You know, it's always changing. So it's always been fascinating when I ask different winemakers that question right there, their response. And every one of them's different. And it's interesting because, I mean, to me, if I had a 100-year-old vine growing in my vineyard, I am not pulling them up because why? Their characteristic has been built over 100 years. They've seen droughts, they've seen heavy rains, they've seen fires, they've seen all kinds of stuff. So their characteristic is curated over those times. And people don't understand that.
That's definitely true. I do feel like I'm very big on grapevine genetics in terms of like clonal differences can be really huge, you know, like even within a variety. With Tempranillo, for example, I've worked with 6 or 7, which is most of the clones that exist in the US, and really, really different. Like some are way more fruity, some are way more tannic, and that genetic variance can really, in my experience, be an even stronger variable than the age of the vines, the site where they're planted, the weather. Like all of these definitely factor in, and there are characteristics of older vines that do mark them out and will give you often more concentrated and, you know, smaller quantity, but sometimes higher quality of fruit. I've found that the clonal differences, the genetic differences of the vine itself, have a really outsized impact. Like if you were to attempt to like make an equation of like everything that goes into what a wine's going to taste like, and what those grapes will be like at harvest, let's say, that would be maybe the most dominant variable. Would be like genetically, what are you working with there? And we haven't really gotten into this, but I'm also a really big believer in hybridization and crossbreeding. And I think that's almost certainly the medium to long-term future of Texas viticulture.
And I 100% agree on that one. So we're going to put a pin on that topic right quick.
Sure.
We're going to pop that right here, okay? One of the things I tell a lot of people is that every year in Texas, we want you to taste what that characteristic of that grape is from this year and the next year. It's like that, because every year that grape grows a new characteristic. So this year it may be very jammy. This year we might have had a heavy drought, so it's going to be holding those nutrients in. So it's going to be much more plumper, and it's going to have a whole bunch of different flavors in it. And then you go over here the next year, it may not get as much. It may get more water, so it's not going to have all those nutrients. So it's going to have a different flavor. And then the next year, maybe there was a fire right down the road, and the smoke came in, engulfed that vineyard. So it's going to incorporate that smoke into that year, and so forth like that. And I tell them that every year a grape here in Texas is going to taste different. So every vintage that you see, try it, because you might find something different. Yeah. Ironically, there's a couple of wineries I have almost same varietal, different years. And one of these days I'm going to do a vertical.
I've held some events in this cellar with wine club members here, and we've done vertical tastings. Our most recent one with Tempranillo, we tasted from our 2014 vintage all the way through to our 2024. So 10 years of the same grapes from the same vineyard, and the winemaking is fairly similar all the way through. And so most of what you're tasting is just the difference that time and age makes, and the difference of these different vintages. And there's the harvest decision, and like there's some variables that we introduce as farmers and winemakers. Maybe we irrigated a little too much or not enough, but most of the variance there is like the annual season, the weather. And some of our rainy years, like 2019 was a pretty rainy year, and there's this lighter style, a little more acid there. I don't want to use the word watery, but it's less intense. And the 2018, 2022, those scorching hot summers, where there was like more drought, more heat, some of the biggest, most tannic wines we've ever made. And generally that's my preference for Tempranillo, for this grape, which is the reason that I think it's one of the best red grapes for Texas, and why in the last few years, like Texas Tempranillos are winning as much or more medals in international competitions as California, because it's one of the few grapes that might actually taste better when your weather's over 100 Fahrenheit instead of 90. And there's a lot of grapes that arguably the quality can suffer when you get to those extremes of heat. And there's a few, especially of the Spanish varieties, that are really adapted to that extreme heat, and they're not negatively impacted from a flavor standpoint. But anyways, I lost my train of thought. Anyways, I love Tempranillo. That's what I'm trying to say.
Talking about
we're talking about a vertical tasting.
Yes.
I love doing a vertical tasting, and it does show exactly what you're saying, that like, even as a winemaker, if I try to have like followed the exact same fermentation plan and same yeast, even if you try to harvest the grapes at the exact same sugar level every year, firstly, like your sampling isn't good enough to hit that reliably. So you're going to be off by a brick here, a brick high, a brick low anyways. But And then it's like the ratio of your sugar level to your acid will differ because of the weather each year. So you could pick at 24 bricks and have a pH of 3.6 one year, and then the pH is 3.9 the next year, at the same exact sugar level. Right. And so that ratio is going to translate roughly to the alcohol to acid ratio in the wine. And so there is no way to perfectly replicate a bottle and have that perfect consistency, even from a chemistry standpoint, and all the aromatic compounds, et cetera, that follow from that. So, it's one of the things I love about wine, and it keeps you like interested in the process. And when you find like a brand that's making a wine that you really love, like, sometimes it means like, I got to stock up on this vintage because I'll never have something exactly precisely like this again.
And what's sad is when you do that and you're like, okay, I'm going to drink this one bottle. And then all of a sudden you went from having 3 bottles to 2 bottles. And then a couple of years later, you say, okay, I want to drink this bottle again. And now you're down to 1 bottle. And then you hold that 1 bottle as long as possible. And finally you're down 10 years down the road. And you're like, man, I really want to drink that. But if I drink it, I'll never get have that again.
Yeah.
You know?
My dad's always like, wine's made to be drank. Don't hold it too long. Don't, or like, don't make it a trophy or something, but
I will have to say that is probably one of my biggest problems is getting a bottle of wine that I really enjoy, get a couple bottles of it, have some to drink. And then I get down to that last bottle and I'm like, I'm not going to drink this. I'm going to hold on a little bit longer. And that little bit longer comes up like, yeah, I'm gonna hold on a little bit longer on it. In fact, actually, when I went to see Sid, I actually gave him a couple bottles out of my collection. And one of the bottles I gave him was a 5-year-old Cap Franc. And that was the last bottle I had. You know how hard that was for me to do
Oh my gosh, that's great.
But also at the exact same time, I think wine is meant to be shared. It's not to be meant to drink by yourself. That's for the Franza and Yellowtail. That's to drink by yourself. Texas wines, I think it's meant to be shared.
Is our ag commissioner, does he actually know his wine?
Yeah, he was actually talking about drinking a cab with his wife. And she actually was talking to the bottle, talking about how much she loved everything, and then was actually talking about the bottle of wine, not him.
Nice.
So I think for what he does, he's got a lot he does.
Yeah.
So for what what he does, and how much he's involved in the wine industry, he knows what he's talking about, and he knows what our varietals are. So, but I don't expect him to go out there and say, "Oh, yeah, this is what Texas grows," without him looking it up. I don't even know that without looking it up.
Yeah.
So actually, that will lead me to a little plug for Uncorked. I actually got a nice little book about Texas history of winemaking, and actually had all the list of what we grow here really well in Texas.
Yeah.
And Tempranillo was number 1 on that list.
Yeah, and even in the, I think even if you go by like what's most widely planted, and they do that, the ag surveys, I believe it's like Tempranillo, Cabernet, Mourvedre are the top 3 planted reds in Texas. And that feels like it kind of makes sense to me, where these are grapes that they do well in hot climates. They have good marketability, like they make great wines potentially. And I think on the white side, I think Albarino was up there. I think at some point, I don't know if it's still the case, but at some point Chardonnay was up there. And I was like, really? There's that much Chardonnay planted in Texas?
Well, I know 2 vineyards, RK and Adega Vino, have huge blocks. Yeah.
That's fascinating to me.
So what, another one so little trivia time. So we're going to talk about hybrid grapes now.
You're going to quiz me? Because I'll fail this, I'm sure.
No, let's see if you know this. In fact, I didn't even know this until I read it the other day. I was kind of shocked by that. There is one grape that Texas grows, and we are the number 1 grower of it in the world.
Yeah.
And we export the most of it. Do you know which one that is?
I would assume it's like Black Spanish or Blanc de Bois, okay.
Yeah.
There's no way we export that much.
Yep.
But probably no one else grows it.
Well, it grows really great in East Texas.
Yeah.
If you try to grow it in West Texas, in fact, I know 2 vineyards in West Texas that grows it, and it's day and night difference.
Yeah.
Because Blanc de Bois wants water.
Yeah.
Give it water. And you put it over in West Texas where it doesn't get a lot of water. It doesn't get as big and plump as it does in the moisture environment. In fact, actually, Bar Ditch Winery in Stephenville, she grows it in her vineyard. and she actually does a filtered and an unfiltered version of it. And I'm just going to say the unfiltered version, I'm not an apricot fan, but her unfiltered one tastes just like a cold apricot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
I have a negative bias against Blanc de Bois. I've rarely found a version I've liked. I will say the one exception for me was I had a sparkling Blanc de Bois from Eliza Christopher.
I was about to literally say that, yes.
That's wonderful.
Oh, it's
amazing. I had to text her because I was like, you made me like Blanc de Bois. I didn't think it was possible. And yeah, but I have a sort of some conflicting thoughts on hybrids. Like the hybrids that are out there, I'm not always a huge fan of as a winemaker. And also, I think they're the future in general.
Oh, yeah. Well, so let me tell you my experience with Blanc de Bois the first time. So we were at Terra Vineyards in East Texas, Mother's Day weekend, surprising my mom out there. And I always have a habit of always having my wine on my left side and my water on the right side. Okay. And so
is that the reverse of how it's properly supposed to be?
I think it's supposed to be reversed.
I think wine's on the right. Yeah. Actually, I have it reversed right now too. Let me fix that.
But I mean, as people have OCD moments. I have that kind of. So
yeah.
They bring my, I see this Blanc de Bois there. I've never had it before. I was like, let me have a glass of that. So they bring it out. And it's so crystal clear. I filtered it so much, it was so crystal clear that I thought it was actually water. So I reached over and grabbed it thinking it was my water glass. And I took a drink of it. I was like, holy crap, this is some great water here. What kind of water is it? And they said, oh, that's the Blanc de Bois. And I'm like, wow. So that was my first experience of that.
If you compare it to water, it's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, ever since then, I've been kind of fascinated by Blanc de Bois. In fact, actually,
you thought this was like a wedding at Cana style miracle.
No, but I mean, it's and then now ever since I found that, I like to try everywhere else because it's different. And like I said, she had it at Bar Ditch Winery. It was filtered and unfiltered, and it definitely tastes out day and night difference. I mean, I've always heard about filtered wines tasting different.
Yeah,
hers was, day and night difference. I mean, it was apricots over here, the unfiltered, and you get over here and you get like a lot of light fruit, a lot of peaches out of it sometimes. Depending on how you tasted it, depending on how cold it was also. So it was definitely an interesting thing. Black Spanish is also something that's coming up that I'm really starting to like as well. East Texas grows that really well too. Who was it? I was having some the other day. I'm drawing a blank on it. I see the label.
Black Spanish is fascinating. So Black Spanish is such an old hybrid that in Foundations of American Grape Culture by Thomas Volney Munson, written in like 1908, he describes how Black Spanish has already been around for maybe 150 years.
Right.
Like it was probably hybridized in the 16 or 1700s. And we don't know if it was an intentional crossing or an accidental crossing, but I read there was a genetic analysis of Black Spanish done just a few years ago. And it's approximately like 69% Vitis vinifera, 31% a mixture of native hybrids, or it's a hybrid of Native American vines. So it has, again, like, let's say almost 70% European DNA, about 30% American DNA. But the American DNA is from like 4 different species, including Berlandieri, which was the major component, which is from Texas, and probably accounts for the fact that Black Spanish is phylloxera resistant, right? The roots won't get chewed up by that louse. It's very Pierce's disease tolerant, is very long lived, drought tolerant, heat tolerant, like more cold tolerant than Vitis vinifera. And so, but it's so fascinating to think, like, was there some brilliant grape breeder that combined like 4, 5, 6, because you would have to, that vine is the result of at least like 4, 5, 6 generations of crossing European vine with a native, with another European, with another native, with another European. And that could have been intentional, or it could have been some of the early like Europeans that brought vines in the 1600s in to the east coast of the US, or the Spanish missionaries that came up through Texas, New Mexico, California. But it was probably on the East Coast, it sounds like, for Black Spanish. And it could be unintentional in the sense that the wild pollen from native vines blew into the vineyard. They planted seeds and didn't know that they were accidentally crossing these. And then that happened several times. And this just happened to be the vine that survived all these generations. So it's really hardy, and that
is actually interesting there. That's one of the things I've always been kind of fascinated about. How do do you break it down to the molecular level of the grapevine and you kind of cross them together? But then when you say 1600, like, okay, so they didn't have that kind of science at that time,
But simple crossbreeding is essentially, like Gregor Mendel in the mid 1800s was, famously like crossing your pea plants, and you get like, all right, we've got a red flower and a white flower and the offspring is pink. And so he started to develop like the rules of genetics essentially. And he didn't have an ability to like see DNA. He didn't know what we now know about like Watson and Crick discovered about DNA and all that. But he understood the basic like rules of heredity. And I think people like, that's sort of like the difference between like scientific knowledge and empirical knowledge. And we empirically know, and we've known for centuries and maybe millennia, that if you cross like this dog with that dog, you may get something that's somewhere in the middle. Right. And this plant and that plant makes something somewhere in the middle with some genetic variance, and you don't always know exactly. But yeah, humans have been like sometimes intentionally cross-pollinating and crossbreeding long before we had the science to know. And certainly like selecting, like we've been, I think for at least 9,000 to 10,000 years, humans have been selecting wine grapes to something I always say when we give tours here, because I love to fathom, in the same way that humans took wolves and turned them into dogs over tens of thousands of years, we took wild grapevines and we turned them into these modern vines that we now have that make better tasting wine than any like wine you could ever make from a vine that you find in nature. And we've done that with lots of crops. And, if you look at like the native ancestor of like corn or a carrot, or like, usually it's like this little wimpy, tiny thing with barely any sugar. And like, we just through selection over long periods of time have like totally transformed all these plants and all these, even like domesticated animals and everything, which is so fascinating. But, to circle all the way back around to Texas hybrid grapes, I think that the long term, even like the medium term, like a few decades from now, future of Texas viticulture will be hybrids that are 90+% vinifera, but have just enough native DNA to give us a few advantages over pure 100% vitis vinifera. Right. And like some of the Dr. Andy Walker hybrids are really interesting. We grow a little bit of Paciente Noir here now in a little experimental block, which was my favorite of the 5 Walker hybrids that came out of UC Davis. So, okay, what was that the hybrid one you're doing right now? The name of the grape is Paciente Noir, and the grape breeder is Dr. Andrew Walker. Okay, don't have several, because that sounds very familiar. I want to say there's another vineyard here in Texas growing that. So there are several. So these grapevines, the Walker varieties, have only existed and been sold to the public since the year 2020. Okay. So any blocks in Texas are less than 5 years old. Okay. So we have some 4-year-old vines, and they're like some of the oldest vines of that variety. And essentially, there was a grape breeding program at UC Davis in California, which is a much better funded grape breeding program than any that Texas has ever had. And the purpose of that program was to develop Pierce's disease resistant hybrids. And the 5 selections that were released from that almost 20-year program are between 94 and 97% vitis vinifera. So they're genetically, like, the vast majority of their genome is from Vitis vinifera vines, wine grapes, but they have a small percentage, 3 to 6% in this case, of Vitis arizonica and I think Vitis rupestris, a couple of Native American vines that carry a gene that they made sure got passed all the way through to the end result, that carry a gene that encodes for resistance to Pierce's disease, which is a major issue in Texas and can kill your grapevines, especially as you go east and into the more humid areas of the state, towards the Gulf. It's a bigger and bigger problem. And it's one of the main reasons why like Black Spanish and Blanc de Bois are grown as you go east from here. And yeah, I think those Walker varieties, I don't know if they in themselves are like the future of Texas viticulture, but they're an improvement in my opinion over I think they make better wine than Black Spanish and Blanc de Bois, and they're fully resistant to Pierce's disease. And so it's at least a really interesting like proof of concept that it's possible to produce wine grapes that, because what you want, obviously, like as a winemaker, what I want is like, I want a grape that's as good as the best tasting grapes in the world for the purposes of making wine. And then in the vineyard, you want a vine that's hardy, that doesn't just like die because it got a little too cold in the winter, that, with a decent irrigation system, you can keep it healthy through a big heat wave and a big drought. We've got our annual, fungal pathogens that can affect vineyards, mildews, et cetera. We've got Pierce's disease that I mentioned. We've got phylloxera, which necessitates grafting. So there's all these environmental pressures, and every region of the world has some of these same and other issues. It's not that Texas is completely unique in that.
Oh, you can go ahead and say Texas is unique.
It's somewhat unique. It is an extreme, it's somewhat uniquely extreme, or it's on the extreme edge of where wine grapes are grown, in the sense of it gets about as hot as anywhere that wine grapes will grow, but it also can get about as cold as anywhere that wine grapes can grow, especially once every few decades when we have a polar vortex storm like we did in 21 come all the way from Canada.
Yes.
Without having a proximate ocean, where we don't have a real buffer against some of those extreme weather phenomenons.
Which, by the way, that didn't help the coast down there. That all the fish in the ocean died down in Corpus, right? During that 21 freeze.
The fish died?
Yeah. My sister lives in Corpus, and all the fish weren't used to that cold weather, and they just floated to the top. They froze.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. They were scooping fish out of the water. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
I didn't even know it got the fish. That's wild.
No, I had to find that picture. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, in this case, I guess you needed an ocean to your north or west, not to the south. But in any case, yeah, we have an extreme continental climate that fluctuates wildly. It can be super wet, super dry here in central Texas or the hill country. And so we do have some unique challenges. But anyways, yeah, I'm very captivated by the potential of hybrids in the long term. And I think that they could really change the industry, and they could also change it like in the sense that a lot of the business model, especially in the hill country, Fredericksburg, is like some people plant 0 vines, or they plant a 1 acre vineyard or a 5 acre vineyard, and that's fine, but some of those small vineyards are like essentially for show, and they're essentially like an aesthetic component of your experience, versus like a real productive estate vineyard that is usually larger in size, and where those grapes are like what you're tasting when you visit, and you're just to make an investment in, let's say, like planting 50 acres, planting 100 acres of grapevines. The reason that not a lot of people have done that, like in central Texas in the hill country, and a lot of people have opted for smaller vineyards, even if they're building like huge like castles of buildings, a lot of it has to do with some of those like pressures on the plants that we've talked about. And I think what could unlock the ability to actually have more large estate vineyards in most of Texas, but let's say the hill country, central Texas, I think It'll be done when there's a hybrid that kind of like can give you the best of both worlds and can solve some of those issues in the vineyard and be a joy to grow and more reliable and less prone to getting some of those diseases and conditions and being short-lived, and also give you the kind of wine quality that your customers, demand.
Wow. And that's kind of fascinating. In fact, actually, being the engineer that I am, anytime I hear something that's interesting or it triggers a thought, like the whole, genetically creating hybrids. I mean, I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, I'm kind of fascinated by this. Now I'm gonna have to go home. I'm going to have to do some homework now. I'm going to have to do some reading on this because I'm really fascinated by this because, I mean, to me, and I know most of our listeners are out there, when we think about anything that's genetically created, we're thinking about Petri dish, puncturing the seed, and, injecting DNA strands into it, changing things out, put it out of the Petri dish and get it growing. And in this case, we're talking about a plant. It's more likely not done that way. It's, probably grafted or vine.
I can tell you.
Okay.
You take pollen. You have a male. I'm doing this. So you have.
Okay. Good.
So
this is a history of a sexual anatomy class now. Okay.
Yeah. So you have
the bees.
If you remember from your high school, usually I think it would be in biology class. Everyone learned about the parts of a flower. Right. You have the pistil and the stamen, the anthers. So you've got your anthers, your male part of the plant that are going to put out pollen. And then you've got basically the pistil, which is like receives the pollen, which germinates and becomes eventually, in the case of grapes, like the fruit that contains the germinated seeds, which can then be planted, right? So grapevines, almost all of the classic grapevines that we use for wine grapes they're all Vitis vinifera, and they're actually all perfect flowers, meaning they're hermaphroditic. You have the male and female anatomy in one flower. And that's actually really nice for farming because they self-pollinate really easily. Yep. So any little gust of wind, usually late April, early May, when those little flowers bloom, they're tiny little white flowers, but the pollen from that same flower can just pollinate itself, or from the same cluster or the cluster next to it. And so you get a warm, sunny morning in the springtime, a little gust of wind, and bam, you've got pollination of your grapes. And that's how you get really reliable fruit set in this crop, is because they're self-fertile, they're hermaphroditic, they're perfect flowers. Okay. Instead of the wild vines are almost always it's a whole male plant and a whole female plant. So a male plant will just put out pollen and never produce grapes. And a female plant will have flowers with the pistil and not the anthers, and will receive pollen and produce grapes, but doesn't put out pollen, right? And most trees and wild plants are male-female, but some are self-pollinating. So if you want to crossbreed, if you want to intentionally cross-pollinate a hermaphroditic flower, you have to prevent it from pollinating itself. So you have to actually emasculate the flower, which is to painstakingly, with tweezers, remove all the male parts of all the flowers of a cluster, and then introduce the pollen that you want to pollinate that cluster after because once it's emasculated, it's now back to basically a female cluster. It doesn't have the ability to produce its own. So anyways, the reason why this is rarely done is it's like you have to have really good vision and a steady hand and a lot of patience. But yeah, like it's not genetically modifying in a laboratory. It's just like pollen from plant A going to plant B, and the offspring will be a cross of A and B. And the difficult part is that somewhere between, depending on who you ask, like 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 10,000 offspring will be better. Will have the combination of traits that will present as good or better than both parents. And so it's a low probability endeavor, and then it'll take years and years to know which one of these 1,000 vines is the future and which are the 999 that are trash. So you have to plant like an entire, that's like 1.5 acres of vineyard basically. Right. So like, to discover the ideal offspring from just 2 parents, you may have to plant 1.5 acres and take 5 years.
Wow. I had a really good educational topic, but you know what? You just brought us a great education topic right there. And that's actually very interesting because I never knew how they did that. And, again, one of the most known wines out there is Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yep.
And I tell everybody, well, it's Cab Franc and Sauvignon Blanc.
Yep.
And I just tell her you got a mommy grape and a daddy grape and you blend them together. I never actually really knew that whole process right there. So that's actually very fascinating because now it makes me want to go home and actually plant some vines and have two different vines and kind of get them to commingle with each other. And
if you want, I'll give you some crossbred seedlings.
Oh, okay.
So I'm doing this in our vineyard.
Really?
I have a hybridization block. I'm cross-pollinating. I got this bug because I read the work of Thomas Volney Munson, who's the most famous grape breeder in the United States, probably ever, but did most of his work in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I think he passed in like 1911 or 19
something like that. Yeah.
Like, so he died over 100 years ago, and unfortunately, he wasn't at his core a winemaker. So a lot of the grapevines that he produced are extremely hardy, and they're kind of like almost ideal for Texas, but they're kind of table grapes or market grapes. They're not really suited. And he was working when the Prohibition movement was starting up, and so alcohol was really quite controversial back then. So anyways, he didn't produce like the vine for Texas,
right,
for Texas winemaking, unfortunately, but he did a lot of like the foundational kind of research and work and collecting wild samples. And he worked on the entire classification system for American grapevine species. I forget exactly. There's like 22 different ones or something like that. So he traveled the entire U.S. categorizing the different species of grapevines that exist all around. I mean, he was traveling by horseback and by train, and
right.
It was really, it was like one of those, reading his work and work about him. You go like, what have I done with my life? I've never traveled on a horseback in any sort of distance.
Oh yeah. And back then you just didn't get somewhere fast, weeks and months,
He was doing this like in July and August in Texas on a horse, and just to get a cutting of a grapevine that was growing up a tree,
Well, and we all know that going from, El Paso to Texarkana is an all-day event. So doing it on horseback,
try it on a horse.
Can't be just an all-day event. It's going to be like a 2-day event, 3-day event,
He would just leave his wife at home with all their kids. Yeah. I got to go find some wild grapevines, honey. Sorry. That's what he said he was doing,
Man, this was very fascinating. I had a really great education topic.
Sorry, I sidetracked it.
No, it was good. That's because a lot of people ask about that, and that's
Can I pour our last bottle?
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I should, before we wrap, I should pour you our last wine if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, sorry, I've blabbered on about one of my core interests, which has been grapevine hybridization. But getting back to Pure Vitis vinifera, this is Mourvedre, and one of my personal favorite wines, varieties. Oh, sorry, there it is. And you're getting kind of a preview of a vintage that we just released. Well, we've released it last week, so it's not a preview. But this is. You tasted an older vintage of Tempranillo. This is our current vintage of Mourvedre. And it's one of the better, it may be the best vintage of Mourvedre we've made. And yeah, well, I'll let you tell me what you think. But
I will have to say, I love me a good Mourvedre. Love me a good Mourvedre. Okay, I've got it. What is that I'm smelling?
I think there's like almost like coconut. It's you're probably smelling French oak. Maybe some there's almost like a bubblegummy, like bright red cherry fruit.
Yeah, I can't.
Or you know what like sandalwood smells like?
Mm-hmm. In fact, actually, one of my colognes I wear are sandalwood-based colognes. Man, I don't know what it is. That is absolutely, it's one of those addicting smells that you just can't stop smelling, like a skunk. Okay, maybe not that. But
Unfortunately, I bought some French barrels that were like a ridiculous expense. And I was like, there's no way that buying a barrel for 2,400 euros is going to make sense. And that's what we used to make this wine. And I'm actually really annoyed that they worked so well, because I'm like, do I have to buy like top tier expensive French barrels every year from Mourvedre now?
I will have to say, I definitely get the oaky taste out of it. I can tell you a way to fix that so you don't cost you as much every year, but we'll talk about that off air. But that is absolutely amazing. I get a lot of that oakiness you were talking about. You know what? You smell fresh, like fresh coal. I'm not talking about like Kingsman. I'm talking about the actual true earth coal.
Coal.
Yeah.
I've like smelled charcoal, but probably not like, I've never been in a mine.
Well, I mean, I've smelled. Best way I can describe it is after you burnt some wood.
Yeah.
And you get that coal that's left over, that's just sitting there, that's not been lit, or it's burnt out and never finished burning. That coal right there, that's what I'm smelling on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, because it immediately.
Yeah, there's like a little hint of that char. Yeah.
What level of char was on that barrel? Do you know?
So it's mostly light toast barrels, but there was one medium plus toast that was more smoky. So that's kind of in the blend. And this is actually Mourvedre from 3 different vineyards. And we don't say this on the bottle, but there's about 6% Cabernet blended in too. So it was a fun blend to put together. It took a while.
That is really, that's. Okay, I'm just going to say this. This does make me want to sit down with a cigar and smoke like this one.
I'm really, really happy with how this one turned out. I feel like it's really just like soft and
it's pronounced but not pronounced, if that makes sense, because it on that finish it gives a nice little pronounce, like, hey, my name is Mourvedre. But when you first drink it, you're like, hey, yeah, I'm Mourvedre.
It's like soft but flavorful.
Yes,
but it's not really like tannic.
Yeah, it's not
especially
very. It's just got just enough tannic on the back of it to let you know it's where it came from. That is really beautiful.
Thanks so much, Will.
That is so good. Guys, y'all need to come out and get a glass of this. You'll really enjoy it quite a bit.
We are open every day here at Valley Mills Vineyards, noon to 6 p.m. daily. And whether you're in the industry or not, we'd love to see folks.
Yeah, awesome. Well, you've already did our education, which was a really great topic. I mean, I've never even thought about that as a topic, but that's actually really a fascinating topic. So I hope everybody learns from that. And, we get a lot of winemakers and vineyard managers that listen to this podcast quite a bit. And so they love listening and learning from other winemakers they don't normally get to talk to. So it's really fascinating that you actually brought that up. We had a good conversation with that. So is there anything else you want to talk about? We heard about your passion about hybrid grapes. What else are you passionate about? I mean, race cars.
I read one of the books I read this winter was Unreasonable Hospitality. And it was written by the general manager of this restaurant called 11 Madison Park in New York that went from no rating to, I think, a 5-star Michelin restaurant in the course of a few years, and ended up being named one of the best restaurants in the world. And that was like it was a good book for me and an interesting kick to get on, because we've talked about kind of like viticulture and how I got into the industry through the farming, and that's the side I love. I spent 10 years as a winemaker now, and I talked about all the keeping those notes year to year and trying to get better and better at making wines that are hopefully complex and balanced and certainly unflawed. But the hospitality side of things was kind of where my brain's been for a little bit now. And I always try to keep in mind that people come out for an experience at wineries, and that book was a good way to get in the mindset of getting a little more creative. Like, what could we do for our guests when they come out that's a little different? And how can you kind of go a little above and beyond for people, surprise them in a nice way, and just keep like really front and center that like you can make the best product in the world, you can win some big award, you could even have like the genetic super vine that I'm talking about, and it grows amazingly well, the wine's the best, all that. But if it is served with like a bad attitude, then it ruins everything. And if you don't have the heart for hospitality and like welcoming people in and making sure they're having a great time and just putting their needs above your own, and having hopefully a team and a staff that can deliver on that, then the product kind of doesn't matter if you are delivering a mediocre experience or a negative experience, and it's like all the wine education and all the wine knowledge, the bit that I have, and there's people that are, like level 3, level 4 sommeliers and know much more about the world of wine or even aspects of viticulture and enology than I do. But hopefully it's like people remember to channel it towards that awesome experience that people have when they actually visit. And I think that is what actually moves the whole industry forward. Sometimes even more so, like we were kind of talking earlier about like, is your experience with wine more like subjective or objective? And there's a lot that's subjective with wine, but like, there's also the fact that like your experience you're having will influence what you're tasting and what you're smelling. And anyways, that's been my recent thing, is like trying to elevate the experience here, trying to like think about redesigning the way we do tours. And there's been some specifics that have come out of like reading that book and thinking about hospitality. But I think it's also just like a mindset of like, ultimately when someone comes in the door, like they don't care about the chemistry of it and the science of it and the farming part of it necessarily. They care about like having a great time and being greeted and treated like a human being, and people delivering great hospitality. And I think that's actually a huge strength for Texas. Like Southern hospitality is a real thing, and we can lean into that like cultural thing about the South that's amazing. And I think we can certainly compete with California or anywhere else in the world on wine quality, but especially on hospitality. And so it's always easier said than done. We're trying to do that, and then there's the reality of running a business. And
and that's fascinating because every tasting room I go to, they always want to try to give a unique experience, because that's the way you attract people coming in, is give them a unique experience. And actually, I will say this, one of the things I read about y'all that y'all did previously, it was like 2013, one of the articles I read, that at one time y'all were helping people learn how to make wine.
We've done a few little classes.
I think that's actually fascinating.
I think we have a tour group that might be
let them come through here and we can wave at them. We're okay with that.
You guys can come in if you need. As I mentioned, hospitality. We'll have a whole tour group coming through. We have had a few like kind of winemaking, little blending classes. Those vertical tastings that I've talked about. We do some events down here in the barrel cellar. Just last week we did a vertical tasting of Mourvedre, and we ended with this 2023 Mourvedre, and it was fun to talk as the winemaker who's made all these wines. People tasted every Mourvedre we've ever made, which is only like 7 vintages, I think. But I got to talk about where the fruit came from, what the weather was like that year. The oak regimen has kind of changed over the years as I've learned how to make the wine in what I think is a better way, and at least stylistically push it in a better direction. And so we tasted from heavier toast versus lighter toast barrels. I love kind of bringing people into the process. Not everyone will always want that experience, but so sometimes you have to like make that an event and have them self-select in. But for the folks that are want to like nerd out, like that's my favorite group of people to give a tour to or have an event with, is like people who actually want to learn. Yeah.
I've been to 2 different wineries that do these events where they did a event where they will have like a whole bunch of group of people at a table, like you drew a number and you sat with these random people that you didn't know, and they did a blending. So all of you had to come together and sit down. You did your own blend, and then you had to come together to figure out which one was the best. And then you make sure you write your ratios down, and then you blended it and you gave it. And if your table won, they made that bottle for you for that whole table. And,
That's awesome.
And I thought that was a great experience, Yeah. And then they even took it one step further is they took that winning bottle and actually made it for the whole year. How y'all doing?
Y'all can come in.
Oh, y'all are welcome. Y'all come on in.
Will was just asking me, well, we're talking about hospitality and about tours and everything. You're on a podcast.
Yeah, you're on camera, by the way. So why? Yeah. So I do a podcast called We Know Texas Vino. So I go around talking to people like Joey here about Texas wines.
Sarah's our tasting room manager, and actually she gave me that book, Unreasonable Hospitality, that I just mentioned. And she's been a big part of shaping our hospitality here and giving a tour right now.
Awesome. Well, good to see y'all. How y'all enjoyed it so far? Yeah.
Do you want to taste? You're tasting the 2022 Mourvedre, but we have the 2023 open on this table.
Oh. She's like, so.
You can take it. Yeah.
Thank y'all. Y'all have a good one.
Thanks, y'all.
So, and this is what I like right here. I like doing this right here. This for me makes me happy because I get to see a smile on people's faces. And I know you do too, making this wine, because when you pour the wine, you get people to drink it. They smile, they're happy, they're merry. And that is, the wine is alive.
Yeah.
See what happened right there?
The wine is alive.
Full circle right there. But what he ended up doing with that competition was he ended up taking that winning bottle and actually bottling it also and sold it, which that was pretty fascinating.
You kind of like crowdsourcing out your winemaking work, which is also efficient,
Yeah.
It's like, can people come prune my vines for me? Can they tuck the shoots? Like, how much of this can I delegate to my customers?
I mean, my finger will tell you a different story.
Do you have an injury?
Yeah, right there on the very tip of my finger.
Oh yeah.
See it right there?
What's that from?
I was pruning my very first time harvesting grapes.
Yeah.
At the edge of the lake. Chris McIntosh, this is all about you, buddy. Out there sitting there pruning, harvesting grapes and stuff, and I was on a good rhythm, so I decided to put my AirPods in, just kind of cancel all the noise out, just kind of be in my own little world. Well, I got too far in my own world, and I was clip right across my finger, and I'm like, looky there. And of course, he said he knew I was going to be the first person to cut himself.
You're not alone. Everyone does it. Yeah. What's the most terrifying to me are those like automatic pruning shears for wintertime pruning. Some of them, I think the more modern ones are supposed to have like a safety mechanism, but the old school ones, like I got handed, I don't even want to say the name of the vineyard at this point, but I got handed a pair of those shears when I was very young in a vineyard. And it's like, when you click this button, the shears are going to snap closed, and whatever's between them is getting cut off, no matter if it's one of your fingers. Yeah. Terrifying. I ended up like using the manual ones just to.
Well, funny story is the next weekend I went and had harvest at another vineyard at Rancho Serrano, which just opened up, by the way. They gave me safety cutters.
No sharp tips on them.
Yeah, well, I mean, all they are is just a little V right this, and you just slide across there, and you just harvest with those. You just all you do. So, yeah, she told me this is why I'm giving you these, because you don't cut your finger off. So, but it just so happens I just keep a pair of my shears in my truck at all times because I never know when I have to do emergency pruning. So
it's like choose your adventure in the wine industry. You can get involved a little bit or a whole lot, and you have to decide how much risk you're willing to put up with,
or how many limbs you will lose. One of the two.
But we do like a lot of folks an annual harvest party. And so we'll bring people out, and some of our best and most loyal like wine club members have started out as like someone who helped us pick grapes. And I think just the same way that I like connected with the industry first through the vineyard and through working with these plants, when people really see like a harvest day and pick these grapes by hand, chuck them in a bucket, they get put in a big bin, they watch them get crushed. Like they actually see the process starting for winemaking. Maybe they see me pitching in the yeast to start that fermentation. It just connects you with the product in a way that like, there's no amount of me explaining that on a podcast or on a tour that can ever be the same as like you got in there and stepped on the grapes with your own feet. And so, whenever we can, we like to like bring people into the process. Even like the way we built this building, there's like windows where you can kind of always see into the winemaking areas. So like sometimes my winemaking crew and I are like goldfish. Like there's just customers walking by, like gawking at us through the windows while we're like, filthy and cleaning a tank or something. They'll sometimes just walk in and ask us. But we wanted to be like literally from the design of the building on, like very transparent. We want to not just tell you that we make everything right here from Texas grapes, but like show you. Right. And you can see I visited Dukeman Winery at one point, and I liked their like windows where you could just see everything. It's like, there's nothing to hide here. There's no big secrets. There's like the winemaker's not like a wizard behind the curtain. Right. Just a guy in boots getting filthy,
when we get done here and I'll get a tour and all that, I do have another camera that I do portable that man, let me tell you something. I told you that I'm an IT guy. Man, I've got a drone in my truck. I've got a gimbal in my truck also. So I can go around and do video also because I'm trying to really enhance this podcast. Oh. And so really, as we're sitting here chatting about this, I'm going to get my gimbal camera and I'm going to record what you just talked about. And I'm going to sub over this video right here with you talking about that. So that way you can see what we're talking about.
I love it. And if you can, if you have time, this is amazing.
Oh, I have all the time in the world today.
You could show, so this building, we're on the ground floor, obviously in the cellar. So our crush room is 30 feet above our heads. And so we use, gravity flow winemaking. We crush everything up top because we're built into this hillside. And then we can just via gravity, take everything as it's being pressed from that crush room up top down to the mezzanine level where we've got a row of tanks, and then down to the ground floor outside. And then we'll use pumps from there to get wine into barrels. But that is one of the unique aspects of this building and this winery is that we actually use gravity to aid us. And it's actually quite efficient. It does mean that you end up walking a lot of stairs as a guest or as a winemaker.
There's no oxygen being applied to it.
And there's no seed. The other big thing is like, I've never put seeds through a pump since we built this building. And especially in red wine fermentations, if you have all your seeds in the mix, in that must as it's fermenting, and you do a pump over without filtering out those seeds properly, your pump ends up grinding up all the seeds and you get that seedy bitterness, which is like kind of the wrong tannin. You don't want too much of that seedy tannin. Right. It's a more bitter, more harsh tannin in your red wines. And so the gravity flow system actually, and if you're doing punch downs on open top fermentation bins and then pressing and just letting gravity bring it into a tank, it also like actually helps us not impart too much like seedy bitterness to red wines. The only drawback is like it's a very vertical workspace. So I think like I'll have to retire at some point. Like I think this building is built for a winemaker to be it's a young man's game. Right. Like once you're in your 60s, I'm not doing that catwalk anymore.
You should actually had a dumbwaiter or something put in here.
Actually, that was one of the things that was cut during the design process. It was like, another $100,000 for that. And we were like, we can't.
You got to cut that cost. Now you're wishing you had that in here.
It got cut out. I definitely do. I mean,
a dumbwaiter is pretty cheap. You just got to do a little bit of manual work, or you can put a little,
just a rope pulley system. Mm-hmm. There's still time. We could start sawing a hole in the roof, maybe.
Oh my gosh. Oh man. Well, Joey, it has been amazing having this conversation with you. I mean, you went back and asked me at the very beginning before we started recording. Actually, I was recording this conversation since we started here. Okay. So everything we started talking about, it's all been recorded. But you asked me, what is my favorite episode of my podcast? And each episode I have is always my favorite episode. But I have to say, the conversation we had here is probably one of the most fascinating conversations I've had with any of the winemakers that we've had out there, because we were just all over the place, but at the same time, we were in the same place. And
Valley Mills Vineyards.
There you go. If you want to have a great conversation, this is where you got to be.
That's where we are.
But I mean, so
maybe this will become also an experience you can pay for as a guest. Like, you can pick like the tasting or the tour or like the 2-hour podcast with the winemaker, but I'd have to charge a lot.
Well, I'm actually fixing. I'm going to go ahead and do this little drop right now for everybody. So June 14th, I will actually be at 4R Winery doing a live episode, and they've already sent out an email and already said you have a question, and they're literally going the members are going to be asking the questions to the winemaker and the owners.
I love it.
And we're going to stream it live on YouTube, and I'm going to record it and throw it out there as an episode.
Into live events now?
Yeah.
I've told you about, like, if I taste a bad Texas wine, I'm like, come on, make it better. But occasionally I taste an amazing Texas wine and I'm like, dang it. This is so good. How did they do it?
Well, I'm going to brag on Landon just a little bit. Landon Winery, our Tempranillo is the only Texas wine in the Wall Street Journal wine subscription.
Oh,
do you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
it's good.
Yeah, so that's right there. Raised the bar for Texas wines even further now.
That's great.
Yeah. So, but we're going to be doing that event. We're going to ask questions. 100th episode. I don't know what I'm going to do for the 100th episode now. We'll figure something out. That's June 14th. Oh, sorry, my 100th episode is. See, this is 97. Mm-hmm. So I got 3 more episodes for 100. So we'll figure something out. Nice. But it's been great chatting with you. Is there anything else? Oh, actually, you know what? Where can people find you at? So online, and what's your physical address?
I mean, if you're somebody in the industry, you could email me at joey@valleymillsvineyards.com. Just chat winemaking or collaborate on something. And if you're just a fan of Texas wine, you can check out our online shop, valleymillsvineyards.com, get a bottle or two, see if I'm just talking smoke or if our wines are really any good. And if you can make it, we're close to Waco, Texas. We're just west of town, and we're kind of we're outside the hill country. We call ourselves Central Texas, but we're not in an AVA here, but so a little bit on an island. But we love having folks visit, and so we'd love folks to just come on out to Valley Mills Vineyards. You can book an experience on our website as well. And we're open for folks to show up. Even if you don't have a reservation, we can usually get you a tasting, and we can always get you at least a glass. And so awesome. Love to see folks, and really thank you for the conversation and the experience. It's fun. I love you said we're going to just like let it flow, let the conversation go where it will. And I hope my tangents weren't too winding. Yeah.
Oh, no, honestly, I'm already hearing a couple of people already sending me messages. This was an amazing episode. The conversation was really great. They learned something they didn't know. I hear this, and I love hearing that kind of stuff in people, because then that pushes me for the next one. I always got to top the one previously. Got to keep topping it. So, well, real quick, let me hit my sponsors. So obviously, Texas Wine Lover. Mm-hmm. Do you have your page already?
We do.
Okay, awesome.
We're a gold member, I think.
Oh, yeah. See, people, if you're a winery and you have not got your spot at Texas Wine Lover, you need to do that, because that is a great app. It lists every winery in Texas out there. You can go there and filter out what you're looking for specifically, and you can find some of the best wines out there in Texas. And then also my friend who actually turned me on to this, to your winery, Eric at Old Vine, Texas. Mm-hmm. He's also a sponsor of the show, because I love what he's doing a lot. I love what he's bringing to North Texas, because there's some people who don't want to drive 4 hours to come and drink wine. Mm-hmm. And so, having that up there, it allows everybody to just come and drink some of the best hill country wines. So go out and see Eric at Old Vine, Texas, in Mansfield, Texas. And then, of course, my newest one and I don't know if you've seen this yet, but we get these ads on Facebook all the time, and one of them is called High Camp Flask.
Okay, what is it?
High Camp Flask.
Okay, it's a flask company?
Yes.
Okay.
So they make these little wine flasks.
Oh.
That will hold the wine at the perfect temperature for 24 hours.
That's classy, I guess.
And then, you ready for this? Both ends are magnetic, that separates and turns into wine glasses.
Oh.
And it seals itself so it does not oxidize while it's in the flask.
That's all right.
So now here's
So you want to go camping, but you don't want to bring a bunch of glass that's going to break and everything. You pour a beautiful Tempranillo into the what is
Valley
it called?
Tempranillo. Valley Mill is Tempranillo.
Of course. You would never settle for less.
But you pour it in this cleaned stainless steel inside. So almost kind of like what they do with the stainless steel tanks.
Sure.
So it stays clean. It doesn't alter the taste of the wine. And it has a seal on it that when you screw it down on it, it does not allow any more oxygen into it. In fact, actually, when you open it, it pops like you open up a soda can.
If you wanted to sneak wine into an event that they didn't allow it, put it in the flask.
I'm not condoning that, but if you do it, so be it.
Try to take it on an airplane. Maybe you'll get through.
I don't know. It's metal. So, but honestly, it looks like the one that I got looks like an old Coleman thermos is what it looks like.
Okay.
Without the little handles on it, But let me tell you something. I was very skeptical about this, and we did a product review with Chris McIntosh at the edge of the lake. I took it with me to Possum Kingdom Lake, and that day was 90 degrees outside. I left it in the sun on purpose. Okay. And it was about 3:00 in the afternoon, and me and my stepdad, we dropped down the tailgate of the truck, and we were taking a little break, and I popped it open, and it was like open a soda can and poured it into our little glasses. And let me tell you something, that red wine was still kind of cool. Wasn't hot. It wasn't bad. It didn't spoil or anything like that. Being in the sun, it was hot in the truck. I left the windows up, everything. I really wanted to try to ruin it. And it was a perfect, I want to say probably a 65, 70 degree bottle.
It's a high-tech flask.
It is. It was a really great product. So you check it out. So they're one of my sponsors also. They actually sent me one to do all this with. And I'm like, okay, I like this. So it's pretty cool. So check them out. All right. Well, since you already did our education, we're going to go ahead and skip and go right to the quotes then. Are you ready?
Yeah. Let's hear some quotes.
Let's see what we got on quotes here. So let me scroll down here. All right. So the first one, I'm going to actually do it as the second one. So the first one is, here's to the corkscrew, a useful key to unlock the storefront of a wit, the treasury of laughter, the front door of fellowship, and the gate of pleasant folly.
Great. Yeah.
Pretty deep
I agree.
conversation. Yeah, it's pretty. And then this last one.
Do we know who said that?
Actually, it didn't tell me who actually said it. It just said unknown.
Unknown. Okay.
Yeah. And then this last one is kind of a funny but serious one. Drink responsible. Don't spill wine.
Yeah.
So
if I can, like the first quote especially made me think, we touched earlier on there's been some sort of like cultural anti-alcohol sentiment out there in the last couple of years. And I'll just say, like, I'm a very health conscious person, and I care about what's in my diet and getting enough sleep. And like, I try to do at least the basics to like hopefully live a long, healthy life if I can. But I do think there's something about like when you really get into like health and longevity and start trying to learn about that, there's a huge part of that that's social connection. And there's a huge part of that that's friendships and good conversation. There's a huge part of that that's like staying active. Yep. And to me, wine fits into that lifestyle and allows you to, hopefully to a responsible degree, but it loosens up conversation. It's something to celebrate with. And there's just so many, I mean, I told you at the start that my family's Italian, and when you visit the Mediterranean and you get a view of that culture where they have some of the longest lived people on earth, a lot of them have a glass of wine at dinner. A lot of them, most of them enjoy wine at a wedding with family, with friends. And it's something that brings people together. And I do think that binge drinking and drinking alcohol to excess and getting really drunk is not good for your health. But having a glass or two for most people, if you can handle it responsibly, I think can just be a great way to enhance your life. Again, it's like you don't need it. It's a luxury.
Yeah.
It's all bonus.
Yep.
But some of my best conversations with friends are over a glass of wine, and it unlocks like a world of travel and education, and it ties into the land and farming, and like it's this cultural thing, and it makes your dinners better. Like there's just so many things that it can bring to your life that I think kind of outweigh those minor, in my opinion, health concerns. And so, anyways, for me, it's like it's got a place, I think always. And I hope people will take like a balanced view towards like, yeah, you want to be healthy for a long time, but like you have to enjoy your life, and you like, you don't know what the future holds, but, I think, it's going to be part of my life.
It's funny you actually say that. Another quote that we've said before in past shows is, if you want to travel, open a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
I mean, plain and simple, because open a bottle of wine, it can take you to a different time and place. It could take you to a different country. It could take you to, whatever, open a simple bottle of wine.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for reading those quotes.
Yeah, you're welcome. It started with my old co-host Michael. We said we want to do quotes, so now we do quotes on every episode. And it's actually starting to get harder to find new quotes because we've already read a lot of them. So I may have to go back and revisit some of those because some of them were really, really good. So, well, Joey, I appreciate it. So this is Will,
and I'm Joey,
and this is We Know Texas Vino. Cheers.